So what you just saw was open up the head gate into our side ditch. So, flood irrigating. This is a topic that's kind of fascinating to me because I grew up in Pennsylvania where this is not a thing. This is an assembly of clips, as you can probably tell, from a few different times that we've flooded the orchard this summer so far. And I just wanted to explain a little bit how it works because if you're like me and you didn't grow up in a place where this is done, most of our water here comes from the snow in the winter, as in it's halfway through July right now, and we have so far had one measurable rain. There's been a few other little rains that made splats in the dust, but nothing, not even like a 1/16 of an inch, not enough to measure. We had one rain that over the course of a day and a half and a few storms added up to like 3/4 of an inch, and that's the only rain we've had since I think like last October, November, something along those lines. In between, of course, we had snow. So this summer's a little drier than average, but not much. This is pretty normal. We just don't get much rain in this part of the world. So this is snow water. It's actually like 90 degrees today. I think it hit 94, which is unusually hot for here. So things are drying up really fast. We have very low humidity, like 10-15% humidity, and as you can probably see, and maybe hopefully not hear too much on the mic, we've just had an extremely windy spring. Yes, parts of Wyoming are windy all the time, but this part normally is not. And here tucked in the mountains, it just isn't normal. We get a windy day or two in the spring, but we're on like month 2 of almost nonstop wind. I know I haven't seen that in the 4 years we've been on the property, but even our nearly 80-year-old neighbor next door said he's never seen this kind of sustained wind in his entire lifetime, and he's lived on this same road his whole life. Anyway, all that adds up to it sucks moisture out of things really quick. So as you can imagine, with no rainfall, that gets to being dry quite rapidly. So given that things can dry up here quite rapidly, people many years before I was born came up with the ability to flood irrigate this part of the world. This is not unique to here. I know it was done in the Middle East, in Africa, all kinds of places. But this is basically, whether you're familiar with it from agriculture or familiar with it from like the permaculture idea of helping water spread out, soak in, filter through the ground, recharge the aquifer, get cleansed through going underground, all that stuff. The gist of this system is that it slows and spreads out the way snowmelt tends to just race off the mountains first thing in the spring, straight downhill, and by midsummer end up out of the ocean, and everything's dried up hills there. We live nearly on the continental divide, so we're practically at the top of the water food chain. But it also means we're the first place to dry up. And as you can probably see on the mountains back there, I don't think there's really any snow patches left. There might be 1 or 2 way up high behind a tree, but nothing visible from down here. Anyway, so somebody commented when they saw how open this valley is in general, oh, it's so sad, settlers moved in and cut down all the trees, and that is what settlers did in some places for sure, but not here. This valley did not naturally have trees, other than right on the main rivers. There'd be lines of cottonwoods and some willows, and up on the mountainsides, as you can see behind me, the north-facing slopes have conifers and such, and the south-facing slopes tend to be so hot and sunny that pretty much nothing grows. But there was no other trees in the valley floor because there wasn't enough water spread out. There are now a lot of trees around here, basically 100% planted by settlers. You can tell the oldest homesteads in the area. People have only been settled here since the late 1800s. I truly mean like settled here year-round. Before that, there was various native tribes that came and went because there's good hunting and such in the summer, but the climate is just too harsh for anyone to actually live year-round, so nobody ever had. Anyway, so those first settlers decided that this would be much more usable and productive ground, able to do things like grow trees, like this lovely apple tree behind me, that if you could spread out and slow that water down and sink it in and make it, not race off all in a few weeks and then be gone. So they set up a big system of canals that, divert water out of the main river, filter it through various smaller ditches and berms. In permaculture, you call this swales and so on. and then it slowly filters into the ground. Some filters back to the main river. Anyway, it just spreads out and slows down that flooding. So it all goes downhill still because water doesn't go away, but it goes much slower. It gets cleaned by the groundwater. It waters a much broader area in the process, and so this is generally a beneficial thing. Now, our property, like I said, has some major downsides to it when we bought it, like being full of junk, having nothing on it but invasive quackgrass, a couple poplar trees along the creek, which what we call our creek is not truly a creek, it's an irrigation canal. But one of the cool things about it was being set up to flood irrigate and having irrigation rights to do so. So it was actually set up originally to flood the entire property for obvious reasons, because we have buildings and such on some of it. We now don't want the entire property flooded, but this orchard area, and then down past the tiny house, past the garden where we have some more trees planted, those two little sections, we only have just over 3 acres here, so that's probably not even an acre total of it that we're flooding. Being able to flood that is a huge blessing. It is one of the ways it's easy to get water under the plastic tarps that are around all of our trees now, protecting them. Though you can water them if you need to through the little center hole, and it seems to fan out, but this floods all the ground. Of course, that plastic also slows our evaporation, like I talked about when I described why we put that down. A lot of the moisture that tries to evaporate out of the ground hits the bottom of the plastic, condenses back in, so we're slowing down that water cycle and just reducing the speed at which things run off, erode topsoil, and so on. But to flood, if you can see this tree well beside me, you do not want your tree standing under, with very few exceptions, things like cottonwoods that actually grow in water, standing under several inches of water for any length of time. So generally when I turn this on, as in open the gates and let the water start flowing, this is all gravity powered, it'll take us, depending a little bit who else is using water and how much snow melt there is, those can all vary, but an hour or so we can get it, clean across the property, shut it down, it all sinks into the ground, and it keeps it watered for weeks. So that's how flood irrigation works. It's kind of neat. It's usually hot when I'm doing this, but if you don't want to be totally soaked, you still probably wear your muck boots or whatever brand you wear. So that's why the 90-something degree weather, trying not to fry my skin too much. I like getting plenty of sun, of course, but too many hours out here in 94 degrees is no good. I'm good with 64 being the max temperature I ever see in my life. Anyway, that's why the muck boots and skirt look. Not the height of fashion, I'm sure, but practical for doing this kind of thing. So anyway, turn the water on. I'm not even sure how long ago I started talking to the camera, but it's already almost to the last row of trees here. That's got to jump the little lane and get to the apple trees and currants on the other side. And then we'll close the gates and go down and do the other end, do the same thing across the trees down there, and then we'll be done. We last watered this actually, I think about 20 days ago, so a little over 2 weeks, almost 3 weeks, and it's just getting dried up enough, because this really deeply saturates the ground, that we are doing it again. Anyway, if you've never been around it, that's how it works. If you're familiar with permaculture, then you can think about our system of the ditches, the main one and then the secondary one, and the little channels that come out through here, and the little tree wells around each thing as swales and berms. But it's working for the most part, and I want to do a whole update just on them. Our trees are now thriving with protection from the quackgrass that was strangling and poisoning them, and being able to easily water. These ditches we did not put in place. The ditches and canal and all that was, like I said, long before I was born. We did do some straightening up and cleaning up, because over time rodents had tunneled through it. This hadn't been used regularly for a while before we bought the property, and so things were kind of a mess. So we did have to do some fixing and maintenance, but we did not create this from scratch by ourselves by any means. So I'm thankful for the work of whoever originally set this up. And that's how several people asked when I showed putting the plastic around the trees, how you possibly are going to water your plants then when they're protected by plastic. And like I said, we do still, on a few other areas that we can't flood because of their location, just water through the little hole right around the center of the plant, and it kind of disperses under there, and the plastic prevents it from evaporating too much. But this is by far the easiest way to simply saturate the ground, because there is some running on top of the plastic, but it's simultaneously running under the plastic, because that's just floating, on top of the ground. There is a little airspace there. So that's how that works. This is the ditch that goes down the full long length of our property. Right back there is our swallow nest and the main creek. We always call it the creek. It's actually an irrigation canal. Anyway, so this side ditch, which was here long before us, one of the, there's some not ideal things about this property, but one of the cool things was that it had irrigation rights for doing stuff like this. Anyway, it goes the whole way down. You can see toward the tiny house. Got lots of trees and bushes planted and blooming along the side here. And the water is up high and muddy now. It's high and muddy in the main canal creek because it's high and muddy in the main river that feeds that because it's spring snowmelt coming down out of the mountains. So anyway, this is all now flowing really fast, which as a side benefit waters everything from the goldenrod along the side there to the blooming serviceberry to the caraganas, crabapple tree, and so on, because it kind of seeps sideways through there. Really loves hunting rodents along here, and the ducks love swimming in it. Anyway, but where it's headed is down here to the orchard where Clay and my brother are at. He's coming over for dinner, so I gotta quit filming here in a minute. But we are going to flood irrigate the orchard, which is getting a little dry. It's been 80 degrees last few days, very shortly after our last snow. We come across our one bridge here. You might be able to see the ducks swimming ahead of me there. Come down here and see what it's doing down here. So you can kind of see how right here is pretty well caught up to the water. It's extra muddy and high flowing in. Down there where Mrs. Duck is, still pretty calm. That was just some residue sitting basically still in there, not flowing. But the flowing water's getting there. And then it's going to come out. There's multiple places it could come out. Which has then several openings that come out into the orchard where the rest of the ducks are. And we'll water all these trees. You do have to do a little regular ditch maintenance, like weed whacking the stuff that tries to grow up in them, since there's not water in these spots all the time. And otherwise that grass as it grows will significantly slow the flow. And when you do weed whack, then the first gush of water kind of has to float all the little debris from that out and downstream, and it just decomposes into the topsoil. But that does take it a minute to get going. But if you don't do that, it really impedes the water flow and can make it take many hours longer to move water. Charlie, the water's chasing you. Yeah. So now you can see, got a lot of water and it flows into this, the art of flood irrigating is a bit interesting. So it flows into this secondary ditch, and then it's coming out these multiple channels, and it's in places out there that you can't see through the grass. As you can see, the ducks love this, but it is, soaking well into our ground. Our ground is very, very gravelly and does not hold water very well. So being able to do this is very nice. We can saturate everything. It's been running for about 20 minutes now, and you can see out in that main channel where most of the ducks are that it is, almost the whole way across the orchard there. Out here, it's to the second to last row of trees. It's not quite as far on this side. You kind of got to keep playing with it to get it leveled out so it floods everything pretty evenly. But that's what it's doing. We'll let it run for another hour or so, and then everything will be soaked, and we will shut it down again and not need to water for, depending on the temperatures, a week or 2 or 3. It depends a lot on how much evaporation and such we get. But this lets us keep our trees very, very happy, and our ducks very happy. But that is how this works. And this, you know, we've fixed up and re-leveled some stuff that had grown in or fallen in over time, but this was set up, you know, long before we bought the property. Not to flood an orchard, of course, but to flood it as a, you know, hayfield pasture. So that is how that is working. So after about an hour and 15 minutes, water's clear across the orchard. It's coming over here, making its way to here. Shortly it should get to our trees on that side, and then we are done. And no, if you're wondering, that poly pipe laying across there has nothing to do with flood irrigating. Our spring water actually runs through that if we need to use that for things in the summer. Thanks for spending your valuable time with us.
I hope you learned something interesting and useful.
Or found something beautiful here.